Chatterjee. He used data from fossils discovered in Brazil, and he has advanced some revolutionary theories as to how this animal used its amazing body.
This huge crest was developed, some kind like motion sensor. So they could pick up if there is a disturbance in the wind, and they could relay to the inner ear, they have a very large ear, and which is like a gyroscope.
So nerves in this go down into the brain?
Brain.
So any factor working on this is going to be relayed to the brain?
Relayed to the brain. It's almost like autopilot device. It's a sensor. Also, it's a beautiful steering device.
This is much more extreme than any other.
Right.
So what could this do that the others couldn't do?
One of the things, as I said, that they could really turn very quickly. So it's like a steering. It's like a radar in front.
So this enabled them, in fact, to be more aerobatic.
Aerobatic, yes.
Some specimens of Tapejara show that it had fur. And that suggests that it was warm-blooded. Warm blood enables an animal to generate the abundant energy that's needed for aerobatics. But Dr. Chatterjee has another imaginative and controversial interpretation of Tapejara's bizarre anatomy.
What we have found, especially this model, we did some simulations. That is, when they simply raise their wing, they could also sail.
You think that it could not only fly in the air, but it went down to sail on the sea, is that right?
There's a very good chance when they land on water during the foraging, because they are probably hot-blooded, they need lots of food, lots of fish. And during the foraging, maybe the whole daytime, they'll just eat and eat and eat. So how to move, how to cover the large area. And it looks like that it was a beautiful, sailing animal, just like a sailboat.
Did the head crest have a function when it was on the water?
I think so. Basically, when they're sailing, the head crest would be just like a jib, the very front sail of a sailing boat. And these two would be the main sail. And simply by, arranging these, 3 sails, they could really sail very fast.
Swans and geese today sometimes lift their wings to catch gusts of air, a behaviour called goose winging. So perhaps Tapejara did indeed do something similar. But big head crests had a much more likely function. There are clues of what that might be in animals alive today, like this colony of gannets on Bass Rock off the coast of Scotland. Pterosaurs doubtless would have lived in great groups around the ancient coastlines, and living in tightly packed communities then as now must have led to all kinds of dramas, just as it does in communities like this one. Gannets nesting close to one another squabble with their neighbours over food and territory. Pterosaurs doubtless also competed with one another for the attentions of the opposite sex. So perhaps Tapehara used its huge head crest in displays to its mate during the breeding season, and indulged in the same sort of strutting performances that so many birds do today. After their courtship, pterosaurs, just like birds, laid eggs. This fossilized egg, which is about the same size as one of these gannet eggs, is actually the egg of a pterosaur. And although it's squashed flat, it's marvellously preserved, so you can see details of the bone inside. The head, as you would expect with a bird head, is quite well formed. It's amongst this mass of bones here. But whereas a bird's wings would hardly be formed at this stage, here the pterosaur wings have got these well-formed bones in them. And that leads us to one extraordinary conclusion. A pterosaur chick, when it hatched, was almost immediately able to fly. The bones of the pterosaur embryo reveal another extraordinary fact. They develop in a way quite different from birds. And what is more, they continue to do so even after the young have hatched. This led to some species becoming gigantic. Here in the southwestern United States, close to the Mexican border, evidence was found of the largest animal ever to fly. A pterosaur so gigantic that for years some scientists refused to believe that it could have existed. "70 million years ago, the area was a hot, lush floodplain. I've come here to meet fossil hunter Doug Lawson. And here Doug made one of the most remarkable discoveries in the history of pterosaur research.
On the side of the sandstone hill was this one isolated bone. And you might have thought, well, it's just another dinosaur, except the material of this animal was very thin, very light individual. And it was difficult because actually if you thought it was a pterosaur, then the bone that you were going to be comparing it to was usually the size of a grain of rice. And this bone was bigger than a grapefruit. And it was covered with sandstone, so it was very difficult to see what it was. But I finally figured out that it was the wrist of the animal, and pterosaur wrists are unique. So given that, when we had these other pieces of bone that we discovered at the location, you come to understand how big that was. This is just the upper arm bone of the specimen.
This.
Yeah, yeah. And looking at this, you realize, wow, we have something that's dinosaur-sized, but it's a pterosaur.
Now, you could not have prevented yourself from saying, how big is this?
Oh, well, yeah, right. Then you
And
say,
so how-
wow, you know, okay,
how big?
we've... so based on what we had, the estimate was about 50 feet.
Wingspan.
Yeah, 50-foot wingspan.
I mean,
estimate.
that is gigantic. Isn't
Oh, yeah, definitely.
it? Mind-blowing. And
I mean,
did people believe you?
Well, there was some question. No other pterosaur was even half the size of this one. And the fact that something so large that could fly, there was almost an aerodynamic question of whether this could even be.
It was a truly astounding discovery. His creature had wings that were so large they could easily have spanned the width of this building. It lived 70 million years ago during the Cretaceous period. It stood 20 feet high, so tall it could look a giraffe in the eye. This was Quetzalcoatlus, named after the serpent god of the Aztecs. It was probably a scavenger, using its long neck to probe deep into the carcasses of dead dinosaurs. Any small animal foolish enough to get in its way was likely to meet a grisly end. But how did the giant Quetzalcoatlus get off the ground? The answer may be found inside the pterosaur arm bones. There are two things you have to get right if an animal the size of a giraffe, like Quetzalcoatlus, is to get into the air. Weight and power. And a close examination of the bones show how the pterosaurs did that.